Hello and welcome back to Psychology 303, the analysis of everyday behavior. I'm Dr. Williams, and today we're going to be covering Lecture 13C related to functional behavioral assessment. And in particular, my lectures on functional behavioral assessment have involved the last lecture where we dealt with indirect methods, and today we're going to talk about direct methods and a special kind of FBA called an experimental functional behavioral analysis. But let's start off with direct methods. So once you've completed your indirect assessment with your interviews and your check sheets, and you've developed your hypotheses about what's going on, what is prompting and cueing the behavior to get started, and what the consequences are that are maintaining the behavior. In other words, you have an idea about what the purpose or the function of the behavior is. We move on to an actual direct assessment to determine whether or not your predictions may be accurate or whether there may be more going on. So in our direct methods, we spend time actively observing the target behavior as it occurs. This helps us to operationally define the behavior, so we can go and watch the behavior and create a good operational definition. And once we have a definition, then we can begin to record the ABCs, if you will, of behavior, the antecedents, the things that come before the behavior itself and the forms that it takes, and the consequences that occur as a direct result of the behavior. So this recording the ABCs of behavior allows us to confirm and disconfirm some of those reported antecedents that were listed from your indirect interviews. So your interviews, the more people you interview, the more likely they are to give you examples of when the behavior occurs and what the situation or the stimuli that seem to precipitate the behavior. And you'll be able to confirm some of those and maybe disconfirm others. It can also help you to pick up any antecedents that might have been missed in that interview. So things that the significant others, people like teachers and parents and counselors, maybe didn't notice and haven't picked up on. By sitting and watching the behavior, you may actually be able to see some of those antecedents that other people have missed. This also allows you to record the actual frequency, intensity, and magnitude. You get estimates from your indirect FBA interviews. You get estimates of how frequently it happens or how intense, but this allows you to actually record the frequency and the intensity and the magnitude of the behaviors when it's happening. And so there's a lot about this direct observation that allows you to confirm or to disconfirm what's been reported by the people who are who you interviewed. Sometimes I think it's important to realize that sometimes problems can become exaggerated in the mind or the eyes of other people, and so this allows you to go in and get a feel for the real frequency and the real magnitude of the behavior. And while you may have made some estimates about the function of that behavior, what it's actually doing and what it's achieving for that client, they come from secondary sources, and so direct observation allows you to identify functions of the behavior that you might have missed. Sometimes the behavior serves multiple functions. It may have seemed very disjointed in your interview. Two people might be reporting very different things, but it may be that the actual behavior serves one function in one environment and a different function in another. So in a classroom, outbursts may be seeking attention, but on the playground, it may be an escape-based behavior that they get sent to the office and get off the playground. So you might not be able to identify the multiple functions of a single behavior. It might serve different functions in different settings. And it will also help you to identify what the consequences are of that behavior in those different settings. What are the reinforcers, and what are the punishers that actually follow the behavior that may help you get an idea of why the behavior continues. There are a lot of ways to do FBA data collection when it's direct. I'm going to give you some examples of some of these. One is to use a scatter plot form. Often people will use scatter plots in the beginning just to mark off the behaviors and get an idea of the location, the antecedents, the consequences, and or just the locations of where the behavior is happening and where it's happening the most. So I'll give you examples of those. We're also going to look at the descriptive method, a simple ABC chart and more complex ABC charts, and then the FBA checklist. And finally, there's also something called an interval recording sheet, where you actually record what happens during certain intervals. So let's talk about scatter plots. Scatter plots take a little while to develop, but once you develop them, you can make multiple copies, and then when you're in the environment, just fill them out when you're using them. So let me give you some examples of what a scatter plot looks like. This is a really good classroom scatter plot. It's been filled out as an example. This is the student is Charles, and the teacher is Mr. and Mrs. Miller, and the observer is someone whose last name is Evans. There are 21 students in the classroom, so you can see that the number of students is filled in. The beginning, with a scatter plot, you mark the time that you start your observation and the time that you end your observation, and then the total observation time. If there's an interval, you record in this case, every 20 seconds. Now those intervals, 10, 15, or 20 seconds, can actually be longer or shorter. They might be every 5 seconds. They might be once a minute. But it depends on the behavior that you're looking for. And how frequently behavior happens. So they've selected to use 10, 15, or 20, and in this case they're using 20-second intervals. And the type of recording, is it continuous or non-continuous? And in this case, they're looking every 3 minutes, they watch for 20 seconds and record the behavior. So you can actually very quickly describe what the data collection method is, and as long as you're using the same method, you can compare sheet to sheet to sheet across different days. Now they also, let me show you here, they also here have a list of instructional conditions. So what exactly are the instructions that the young man is receiving, and how those different kinds of instructional conditions affect whether or not there's a problem with the behavior. So we have, is it a paper and pencil task? Is it a listen to the lecture kind of condition? Is the pupil discussing with the teacher? Are they talking together? Are there manipulatives? Is it an instructional game? A worksheet in a workbook? Readers? Is it student to student work? Is it media or other technology? Is this a transition period or other? And then across the top, they've categorized both appropriate responses and inappropriate responses. You would do this when you've been previously told that, in fact, that they do sometimes use appropriate responses in some circumstances. So here you have, you can talk about, is it an academic discussion or academic talk? Is it asking to have a question answered? Are they asking a question? Are they, they're answering a question. Are they asking a question? Are they paying attention? The task participation, are they reading aloud? So a list of doing what is appropriate given the instructional methods. So in this part of the graph, we're recording where and when, so where, under what conditions, they provide appropriate responses. Plus a total line, so we can add them up to see where their skills are best. On the other side, we have inappropriate responses, and here we have a list of inappropriate ways of responding. So here we have, they become aggressive or disruptive, they're off task, they're out of their seat, they're non-compliant, they talk out, and other inappropriate behaviors. And so clearly this student is being referred for a functional behavioral assessment to help identify under what circumstances do these inappropriate behaviors occur. And so we're now able to see that when you look at the recording, so here on this particular date, they recorded some appropriate responses during this period to certain kinds of instructional techniques. But they also record a lot of problem behaviors associated with these techniques. In the case of listening to lecture or a teacher-pupil discussion, sometimes they have appropriate responses and sometimes they do not. More often, problems occur when the teacher and the pupil are discussing. They have a higher number of inappropriate behaviors overall, but they also have a higher number of appropriate responses. So this one looks like it would be fairly easy to eliminate these by replacing them with appropriate responses that they already know how to do. So this one will be fairly easy to address. It's the same with listen and lecture. However, there are also a lot, 14 total, of inappropriate responses when the instructional conditions are reading. And so this tells me that his biggest problems are when he's told to read the instructions. And he has lots of acting out behaviors. This might indicate, for example, that his reading skills are not very good. And so it gives you an idea in terms of where the problem behaviors are occurring and under what conditions. So this scatter plot is allowing us to identify not only what the behaviors are and how much they engage in them, but also the conditions under which they make them and conditions where they show appropriate behaviors. Those will be easy to replace these inappropriate behaviors over here with appropriate responses that he already knows how to do. So this scatter plot provides us with a lot of information. Let me show you another one. Here's another functional assessment scatter plot that's actually broken across the different classes of the day and days of the week. So discovering in what class and on what days the problem behavior tends to occur. So we have math, science, social studies, English, lunch, PE, and art, and the 5 days of the week. And when we add them all up, we notice that his biggest problems are in math and in English. And in other classes, he doesn't have these problems. So, or they're rare. And so focusing your intervention in math class or in the English class would clearly be the way to do this. So primarily they occur on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So you might then ask, what are the instructional techniques? What are the assignments? What is the classroom environment like on Tuesday and Wednesday that's different from Monday, Thursday, and Friday? Maybe Tuesday and Thursday are the days that the student teacher runs the class, and that would tell you that there's an issue there as well. So this kind of use of a scatter plot can help you really get a good handle on the where and when and possibly why the behaviors are occurring. Now, the second thing that you want to do are ABC observation forms. So I'm going to give you some examples that I've made up and some examples of forms that have been filled in. So here's a traditional ABC observation form, the kind that you'll be using for your behavior modification project. You put in the client's name, that'll be yourself. You're going to be doing your own observations, where you're doing your observations. So if you're doing your observations at home, you would use one of these forms. If you were using this at school, you would use another form so that you would go from location to location. The observation date and time and what the activity is that you're involved with. We know what the behavior is. You've defined it so you know what you're looking for. And so what you're going to do is record what happens before. So what is the antecedent? What comes before the first instance of the behavior? So here the behavior happens. And we want you to record both what comes before the behavior and what comes after the behavior so that we get an idea of what's operating. And you do this every time the behavior occurs. So here's an example of an ABC form that's been filled out. We have the student's name, the observer, the behavior, the observation date, the time, and in this case, the class period. And it looks like we're out on the playground. So this must be during PE. So the observer is just doing a narrative flow of what's occurring. So Trish, who is the student, she joins a group of girls playing catch. And so she joins the group, and then her behavior is she waits for the ball to be thrown to her. Okay? And the girls don't throw the ball to her. So she responds, "Throw it to me." And the girls throw it to her, but she misses it, and another girl catches it and throws it to someone named Sandy. Then the ball is thrown to Karen. Now, Trish has still not received the ball, so she yells, "I said throw it to me, you jerk." Karen begins to walk away with the ball. Trish runs up behind her, kicks her, saying, "Give it to me, damn it." And Karen cries, and Trish takes the ball. So here's the problem behavior, and these are all of the events that occur before the behavior comes up. And so the intervention would be based around this kind of dynamic interaction between the girls. Here's another example of Ben. Ben has disruptive behaviors during period 3 for him. And so, again, the antecedent, the teacher starts and tells the students to look at the board, and instead Ben looks around the room and he looks at the other kids. But the teacher continues the lesson and she ignores Ben. So she doesn't catch him misbehaving at this low level. She lets it slide. The teacher puts examples on the board and asks the class to work problems. So Ben looks around, and then he calls to Fran, who's probably a friend of his. And the teacher asks generally for quiet. She doesn't single him out. She just generally asks for quiet. The teacher tells the class to do 5 more problems. Ben turns around and pokes Fran with his pencil. And the teacher's first response to Ben specifically is to say, "Get to work now," in kind of a harsh tone. And so Ben's response to that consequence, which is also his antecedent, Ben calls out and says, "This is too hard." So he throws the worksheet and the book on the floor, and the teacher tells him to come forward, gives him a hall pass, and sends him to the office. So now you have an outline of the dynamic that's happening. Ben misbehaves once, the teacher ignores him. Ben misbehaves a second time, and the teacher just generally asks the class in general. And then when Ben misbehaves a third time, she breaks into yelling at him, and his response is to give up, throw things down, and then she throws him out of class. So the question now is Ben, if Ben were corrected sooner, would he, would the situation not get so out of hand? Or is he just waiting for an opportunity to throw that stuff on the floor to get the teacher to throw him out so that he doesn't have to work with what he calls work that is too hard? So we now get a better feeling of what's going on in the environment. And it could be that in the interview, the teacher might classify this behavior as Ben is always seeking attention, or Ben is defiant, and she doesn't see her own role in it. But this allows you to capture her role in this interaction. So here's another ABC form that I would use, and a lot of school use, when the antecedent, when the problem behaviors happen only occasionally. So if the problem behavior is, say, swearing, and the school consequences for swearing is to be sent out, then I might start, sometimes this is what the teacher will fill out. They'll write down what the antecedent is. So, teacher asked a question, and the individual is like, screw this stuff, I don't like it, it's too hard. And then the consequence is to write a referral and send the child out, and then comments. So this is a one-time incident form. I'm going to go back to the previous slide. This slide is for when the behavior occurs over and over again, or when you want to capture an entire interaction that builds until you get the problem behavior. Okay. So you'll be developing one of these functional assessments for yourself. We really want to understand the purpose of your problem behavior, either why it occurs or why it doesn't. So for example, I might get up in the morning and say, gee, I really should go exercise. But then it's followed by my son saying, did you make me breakfast? And can you get me to school on time? And so I don't do the behavior. And then when I come back home, I think, I really should exercise. but then I realize that I only have an hour before class, and so I have to get ready and prep, and so I don't do it. And so even when you have the absence of a behavior, you can do a functional assessment by looking at the behaviors that interfere with your ability to do the behavior you want to do. Okay? So you're thirsty and you know that you should drink water, but you're thirsty, and so you go to the fridge and you open the door and the first thing you see is a Diet Pop, and so you take that and you drink it. And you don't pour yourself a glass of water. So we'll be doing one of these functional assessments on ourselves, during week 3. So there are 6 steps in a functional assessment. We're going to start with that behavioral interview. We're going to use the information in that interview to develop a hypothesis about what the ABCs of behavior are and what the function of the behavior is. But then we're going to conduct a direct observational functional assessment and confirm our hypothesis or replace our hypothesis with a better hypothesis, and use our understanding of the ABCs of behavior and the function of the behavior to develop an intervention plan. Now, if your observations are completely not consistent, or if you're still questioning whether or not you're right, you may decide to do further assessments that are more telling. And so one possibility is you may go back and repeat your observation, or you might conduct a functional analysis, which is an experimental approach to see whether or not your hypothesis is correct. So this experimental method, called an exploratory functional analysis, is used to assess the target behaviors across different conditions. It's basically a mini reversal design. It's like an ABA reversal. But instead of putting in a treatment variable, you would manipulate different conditions. So you're going to explore establishing or abolishing operations. So what are the antecedents? And you're going to you'll put them in and you'll take them out and see. So if the teacher does yell at the student, does the behavior occur? And if the teacher doesn't yell at the student, does the behavior not occur? And that will help you identify whether yelling is part of what sets the behavior off. You may assess the behavior in different contexts with different antecedents or discriminative stimuli, SDs. And that will tell you whether or not you're on the right track. You may also look at the consequences. So you may want to assess different functions of the behavior by looking at the consequences. What happens after the behavior occurs? And going through your list of, I think it serves this purpose, and so looking at when certain consequences happen and when others happen, when does the behavior occur, when does it not? These experimental methods, it's basically hypothesis testing, where you're testing a specific hypothesis. You don't need to test every possibility. What you're really doing is you're testing what are called motivating operations. Is the person hungry? This always happens when the individual is hungry. So you might want to look and see I'm going to go look at conditions where I know that the child's hungry right before lunch, and then I'm going to look after lunch and see whether hunger makes a difference. You want to know about the antecedents. Sometimes we call these SDs, which are cues for reinforcement for the behavior, SPs, which are cues for punishment for the behavior, or S deltas, which are cues that the behavior will be on extinction. So you'll go and observe during those conditions to see whether or not which type of cue actually sets the behavior off. You may look at consequences, like you think you know what the reinforcer is, so you might do a reinforcer assessment and look at the consequences that you think are maintaining the behavior versus consequences that you don't think have an effect. And so by doing this, you're able to go in and add or subtract, include or eliminate antecedents, and setting operations like not enough sleep or hunger or uncomfortable clothing, kind of general variables related to the individual, reinforcers, and antecedents. So you can check all of those pieces experimentally by observing when they're present and when they're absent. All right. So what will this FBA do for you, this effort in looking at and defining the behavior? First of all, it's going to help you develop hypotheses about the ABCs of the target behavior. You develop your data collection instruments. You need to know what the antecedents are so that you'll be able to use your data collection instruments wisely. Direct observation can confirm your operational definitions are good and accurate and strong, or whether they need to be modified. They will help you confirm and modify your ABC analysis to see whether or not what you think is that antecedent behavior and consequence that's critical to the behavior, or whether there are others, or whether you need to modify your hypothesis about the ABCs. It's going to help you work on your instruments so that they match the situation, and it will help you develop ideas for creating an intervention plan. And so the FBA does a lot of things. You want to use your FBA to guide your interventions, to help you develop a plan and an intervention design. What do you want to use, an ABAB reversal? Do you want to use a changing criterion design, or do you want to use a multiple baseline? It will help you to gather data using instruments that have been modified and targeted to the specific behavior. And if your treatment doesn't work, then you'll be able to use your first FBA to go back and do another FBA to try and narrow down and reassess the ABCs of your target behavior. So functional behavioral assessment is a critical component of intervention. What it really is designed to do is to make sure that you understand as well as you possibly can the behavior of interest and the conditions under which it occurs, so that you can develop an appropriate intervention and help improve that person's behavior. So for yourselves, you may say, well, I want to drink more water. And you say, I don't, but why don't you? And when don't you? And how don't you? And having all of that information, when are you more likely to drink water? When are you likely to drink something other than water? So you end up with a much more detailed view of the behavior than you do at first glance. So we're going to be doing some activities in class and getting you ready to do an FBA on your target behavior. And so hopefully this information will help you. Chapter 13 will really help you with your FBA. All right, so have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.